Our first Pamper project is the Octagon Face Scrubbie. For this particular project I used 10 ply cotton from Bendigo Woolen Mills in a watermelon colour, size 4 crochet hook, some stitch markers, a pair of scissors and a darning needle. Once you have your materials ready, we can begin. To begin our face scrubbie we need a magic ring. I'm going to show you how to do that quickly. I do have a YouTube tutorial that will give you further support if you need that. Yarn over the hand, close it with the lower 2 fingers, cross at the top, all the way over, hook goes under the first strand, over the second, pull that through, turn it, grab that yarn, pull it through again, pull the tail to tighten the magic circle. Okay, for our first round we need to begin with a chain 1, and then we're going to be doing 8 puff stitches into this magic ring. So to do a puff stitch, yarn goes over into our circle, yarn over again, bring it up. I give it a little raise with my hook, just lifting it up a bit. This will make it easier to pull the yarn through at the end when we have 9 loops on our hook. Yarn over, through the ring, yarn over, bring it back. We need to do this a total of 4 times, so that's 2. Yarn over, through the ring, yarn over, bring it back. Bit of height, that's 3. Yarn over, through the ring, yarn over, bring it back. That is 4. And we will have 9 loops on our hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yarn over and bring that through all 9 loops. We then chain 1 to close the puff stitch. That's what a puff stitch looks like. What I'm going to do here is use a stitch marker to mark our first spot. When you do a puff stitch you will get 2 loops on top. I'm going to use a stitch marker to mark that first loop because that's what we'll be slip stitching into at the end of the round. This is our chain at the start to close the magic ring, our chain 1 to lift the yarn up, and our first 2 loops from the puff stitch. Using a stitch marker to note the first one. Okay, I'll show you the puff stitch again. Yarn over the hook, into the circle, yarn over, bring it out, give it a little bit of a lift, yarn over, into the circle, yarn over, bring it out, that's 2, yarn over, into the circle, yarn over, bring it out, that's 3, yarn over, into the circle, yarn over, bring it out, that's 4. Yarn over through all 9 loops on the hook. I do this by turning my hook gently side to side, which makes it a bit easier to pull that yarn through, and chain 1 to close it. Moving around to our next puff stitch. Again, yarn over, through the circle, yarn over, bit of height, yarn over, through the circle, yarn over, bring it back, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, yarn over, through all 9 strands, and a chain 1 to close. We need to do this until we have a total of 8 puff stitches on this round. I recommend pausing the video here. Continue creating your puff stitches and I will see you when you get to your last one. Coming to the end of round 1, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 puff stitches. I have 1 more left to make. 1, 2, 3, 4, yarn over, pull that through, chain 1 to close. From here I'm going to slip stitch into the first loop on our first puff stitch that we did for this round. Slip stitch into there, and what I can do here is pull the tail from my magic ring, pull that as tight as I can to close this circle. work that around, pull that nice and tight. And there we are, round one is done. Got a small gap in the very middle, but I'm okay with that. For round two, we need to slip stitch into position. So we've slip stitched into the first loop of our first puff stitch at the end of our last round. We need to slip stitch into the next loop. Slip stitch into there, and then what we're going to do is slip stitch in between the first two puff stitches. So you need to dig in a little bit, separate those puff stitches till you find your gap, and you need to slip stitch into that gap there. Once you've done this, chain one to lift up, and this is our repeating pattern. We're going to do 2 puff stitches into this same space, this gap here in between the 2 puff stitches from the previous round. Yarn over, go through your work, yarn over, bring it back, 1, 2, 3, 4, that'll be 9 loops on the hook. Yarn over, bring that through all 9 loops, a bit of a twist in action, chain to close, and we do that again into that exact same space. Yarn over, through that space, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yarn over, through those 9 loops, and a chain to close. So I've done now 2 puff stitches into that first space. Now what we need to do is a front post double crochet around our next puff stitch here. So to do that, yarn goes over the hook, we go back into this space, we go behind that puff stitch, and we bring our hook out on the other side. So we've gone behind that puff stitch. Yarn over the hook, bring that back, yarn over through the first 2 loops, yarn over through the next 2 loops. And now we're going to be doing 2 puff stitches into this space here, in between those 2 puff stitches there. Yarn over, in we go, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yarn over, bring that through all 9 loops, chain to finish. Another puff stitch in that same space. Yarn over, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yarn over through all 9 loops, let the chain to close. So this is our repeating pattern. We're going to do a front post double crochet around this one, and then 2 more puff stitches in between. So yarn over, behind that puff stitch, out the other side, grab a yarn, bring it back, yarn over through the first 2 loops, yarn over through the next 2 loops. We'll then do 2 puff stitches into this space here. I'm going to recommend pausing the video here and continuing with this pattern all the way around. So 2 puff stitches in between that space, front post double crochet around the next puff stitch, 2 puff stitches in the next space, front post double crochet around this puff stitch, 2 puff stitches in that space there. Continue all the way around, and I will see you when you get close to the end of this round. Just completing round 2, I'm about to do my very last puff stitch in between our last and first puff stitch of the previous round. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can check this by making sure I have 16 puff stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So to finish off, I need to do a front post double crochet. Oops, better finish that puff stitch with a chain. Front post double crochet around our first puff stitch of the previous round. And then what I'm going to do is slip stitch into the first loop of our first puff stitch, which is the one on the right and left. And that finishes round 2. Round 3 involves doing front post double crochets around every puff stitch of the previous round, as well as every front post double crochet of the previous round, and doing half double crochets between each 2 pair cluster. So to start with, we chain 1. We're going to do a front post double crochet around this puff stitch right underneath us. We're then going to do a half double crochet between those 2 puff stitches, so find that gap, yarn over into the space, yarn over and back through all 3 loops. Front post double crochet around the next puff stitch. We're going to do a front post double crochet around our previous front post double crochet. And we repeat this pattern. I'll do it one more time for you. We've got our next cluster of 2 puff stitches. So we do a front post double crochet around that first one. We do a half double crochet in between the 2 clusters, the 2 puff stitches. We do a front post double crochet around the next puff stitch. And a front post double crochet around our front post double crochet from the previous round. I'm going to recommend pausing the video here and continuing with this pattern all the way around. Front post double crochet around the puff stitch, half double crochet in between, front post double crochet around the next puff stitch, front post double crochet around, a front post double crochet from the previous round. Continue on with this pattern and I will see you when you get closer to the end of this round. Just completing round 3 with my last couple of front post double crochets around the last puff stitch from the previous round. And around front post double crochet. To complete the round, I slip stitch into my first front post double crochet from the start of the round. I do recommend using stitch markers to note the first stitch of each round. I do have a tendency to forget to put them in and add them when I'm part way around, but please try to remember to put them in after your first stitch of every round, so it makes it easier at the end of the round to help you identify where you need to join. And if, like me, if you tend to not do that and forget, just to show you, here's our first front post double crochet. This is the chain one that we did, so we don't join into our chain one, we look for our first front post double crochet. Sometimes it's easy to identify the first stitch of the round. Often it can be tricky, especially when you're working with slip stitches. And that's the end of round 3. Let's begin round 4. We start with the chain 1, and we're going to do a front post half double crochet around that same stitch. So if I look directly under my stitch, there's a post there, and there's a chain next to it which we use to start that round. So I'm going to go behind both of those parts. Yarn over, bring it back. It's a half double crochet, so yarn over and through all 3 strands from the hook. First stitch of the round, so I'm going to use my stitch marker so I know where to join at the end. Next to this, we're going to do a half double crochet, and in the next stitch it's actually this space here where your last stitch just came out of. And if I explain that over here, here is my stitch. If I do a front post around this stitch, I'd come out this side into the next stitch's space. So if you're doing a stitch next to a front post stitch, you need to go right into the same space that you'd come out of. So half double crochet in there, and then my first picot stitch, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and I do a slip stitch back into the first chain, 3, 2, 1, so back into that space there, slip stitch into there, and then half double crochet into the next space, next stitch. And I can show you now our little picot, little embellishment on the top there. This becomes our repeating pattern now. We're going to do 2 front post half double crochets. So going around our next post, which is not this one here because that belongs to that stitch, it's this one here. So we're going to go behind that one, half double crochet, straight through all 3 loops, and then another one through the next post as well. Going to do a half double crochet, so again it's in that same stitch, that same space that we've just come out of. So into the top part of that, half double crochet, and then our picot. So chain 3, 1, 2, 3, slip stitch back into the first chain, 3, 2, 1, back into this space here with a slip stitch, and then half double crochet into our next stitch. I'm going to show you this repeating pattern one more time, but that just shows you how it's looking on the side, starting to square part of this circle off. So for one more time, 2 front post half double crochets, not into this post because that belongs to this stitch, into the next one. 1, 2, half double crochet back into this stitch here, and our picot, 1, 2, 3, back in, slip stitch back into that first chain, half double crochet into our next stitch, and we're ready to repeat that pattern again. What I'm going to suggest is you pause the video here, continue repeating that pattern all the way around, and I will see you when you get closer to the other end. Just finishing round 4, I've done my 2 front post half double crochets, half double crochet, so I'm up to my final picot stitch, 3 chains, slip stitch back into the first chain, half double crochet to my next stitch, and then I finish with a front post half double crochet, If you remember, we started the round with a front post half double crochet, so we can complete it with one, which keeps it in line with our pattern of 2 front post half double crochets. All I need to do now is slip stitch back into the very first stitch of the round. And that is the end of our Octagon Face Scrubbie. I'm going to show you how I securely sew in my ends. If you're fine to do that, I'd like to thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you on some of my other pampering projects or other projects on my channel. Okay, to finish off my project, one thing that I do is an invisible finish. So I've already started that because I have, at the end of my last round, I did finish with a slip stitch here, so I'm just going to replay that to that part again. So what I do now is I cut my yarn, and back here I just pull it straight through. I now put that into my darning needle. I slip stitched into this stitch here. So what I'm going to do with my needle is I'm going to work into the next stitch, and I'm going to go straight through that one. Then I'm going to come back, so I've gone through there, and I'm going to go into the back loop of that last stitch. So once I've done that, provides me with an invisible finish. So then I just need to work this through the back, and the easiest way I find to secure your yarn is to work through a few stitches in one direction. So I'm going to go one way, then turn around and come back. Go over that stitch, don't go into the same space or you'll just undo your work. Work through a few stitches in the opposite direction. Turn work again and back once more. This project, the stitches are quite tight together, so I don't need to go too far. Once I've done that, just chop off that tail. That part is secure. For my starting tail, I started with a magic ring, so what I can do, same deal, through stitches. They're puff stitches here, so it's fairly easy to get through a few of them. You can either continue to work around in one direction, or you can turn around and come back. I have a long tail and fairly large starting magic ring with puff stitches, so it's going to be quite secure for me to just work up on my way around through a few of them in the same direction. I feel that's going to be secure enough. And that's my Octagon Face Scrubbie complete. Thank you for joining me. Hope to see you in some of my other projects.